I never believed in miracles until I saw those tiny white paws trembling against the scorching asphalt of Interstate 95. The morning sun was already brutal at 7 a.m., casting long shadows across the construction zone where I'd been working for the past 3 months. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I was about to witness in the middle of that 6-lane highway. There, barely visible through the heat waves rising from the pavement, was the smallest creature I had ever seen. A kitten so tiny it looked like a cotton ball someone had carelessly dropped. But this wasn't just any kitten. As cars thundered past at 70 miles per hour, their massive tires missing this fragile life by mere inches, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The little thing wasn't moving out of the way. It couldn't see the death machines roaring toward it because this tiny soul was completely, utterly blind. I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now? And which city or state are you watching from? My name is Marcus, and I've been a construction worker for 15 years. I've built bridges, laid foundations, and watched cities grow from nothing but dirt and dreams. I've always been the kind of man who believed in hard work, getting the job done, and minding my own business. I never thought of myself as a hero. I was just a guy with calloused hands and a thermos full of coffee, trying to make an honest living. That Tuesday morning started like any other. My alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. in my small apartment just outside of Jacksonville. The same routine I'd followed for years: shower, instant coffee, 2 pieces of toast with peanut butter, and out the door by 6:15. The drive to our work site on E95 took exactly 23 minutes, and I'd made it so many times I could probably do it with my eyes closed. Our crew was responsible for a major highway expansion project. We were adding 2 more lanes to accommodate the growing traffic in this part of Florida. It was dangerous work, the kind that required constant attention and respect for the massive machines and speeding vehicles around us. One moment of carelessness could mean the difference between going home to your family or never seeing them again. I'd been working construction since I was 19, right after my father passed away and left my mother struggling to pay the bills. It wasn't the career I dreamed of as a kid, but it was honest work that paid enough to help mom keep the house and eventually put my younger sister through college. Over the years, I developed a reputation for being reliable, careful, and someone who looked out for his crew. But I'd never been tested like I was about to be. The morning air was already thick with humidity, promising another sweltering Florida day. As I pulled into the staging area where we kept our equipment, I noticed something felt different. There was an unusual quiet in the air, like the calm before a storm, though the weather forecast had called for clear skies. My supervisor, Tony, was already there, going over the day's plans with the other crew leaders. We had a tight schedule to meet, and the state was breathing down our necks about staying on track. Every day we fell behind meant thousands of dollars in penalties and the possibility of losing future contracts. I grabbed my hard hat, safety vest, and tool belt from my truck and joined the morning briefing. Tony was explaining that we'd be working on the median strip today, right in the center of the highway where traffic moved at its fastest and most dangerous. We'd have concrete barriers and flag workers to protect us, but everyone knew the risks. One wrong step, one moment of inattention, and you could become a statistic. As we made our way to the work site, I found myself thinking about why I'd stayed in this job for so long. Sure, the money was decent and I had good benefits, but there was something else. There was a satisfaction in building something that would last, something that people would use long after I was gone. Every bridge, every road, every structure we created would serve the community for decades to come. But lately, I'd been feeling restless. At 34, I was still single, still living alone, still following the same routine day after day. My mother kept asking when I was going to settle down, find a nice girl, maybe give her some grandchildren. My sister Sarah had gotten married 2 years earlier and had just had her first baby, a little boy named Jake, who had completely stolen my heart. I'd been thinking more and more about what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. Was it just going to be miles of concrete and steel, or could it be something more meaningful? I didn't know it yet, but the answer to that question was about to present itself in the most unexpected way possible. The work site was organized chaos, as always. Massive machines moved earth and concrete with mechanical precision, while crews of workers coordinated every movement with military-like discipline. The sound was deafening, engines roaring, hydraulics hissing, metal clanging against metal, and over it all the constant thunder of traffic just a few feet away. I was assigned to work on the eastern section of the median, where we were installing new drainage systems. It was detailed work that required focus and precision. The pipes had to be placed exactly right, or the whole system could fail during the first heavy rain. I'd done this kind of work hundreds of times before, but I never let familiarity breed carelessness. As the morning progressed, the sun climbed higher and the heat became more oppressive. By 9 a.m., the temperature was already in the 80s, and the asphalt was hot enough to burn through the soles of your boots if you stood still too long. The heat waves rising from the pavement created a shimmering effect that made everything look like a mirage. It was during one of these moments, when I looked up from my work to wipe the sweat from my forehead, that I first saw movement in my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was just another heat mirage, or maybe a piece of trash blown by the wind from passing trucks. But something made me look closer. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. There, in the center lane of the northbound side of I-95, was a tiny white kitten. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, so small it was barely visible against the gray asphalt. But what terrified me most was how it was moving, or rather, how it wasn't moving properly. The kitten was wandering in confused circles, its tiny head weaving back and forth as if it was trying to orient itself. Cars and trucks were racing past at deadly speeds, their drivers completely oblivious to the microscopic life form that had somehow found its way into the middle of this automotive death trap. I dropped my tools and stared, unable to believe what I was seeing. How had a kitten so young ended up in the middle of a major interstate highway? Where was its mother? How had it survived even this long? As I watched, a massive 18-wheeler thundered past, missing the kitten by what couldn't have been more than 6 inches. The blast of air from the truck's passage sent the tiny creature tumbling, and it struggled to right itself with shaky, unsteady movements. That's when I realized the horrible truth. The kitten wasn't just lost or confused. It was blind. Completely, totally blind. Its eyes, which should have been bright and alert, were clouded over with infection or disease. It had no idea where it was, no understanding of the mortal danger surrounding it. It was simply wandering, calling out with pitiful little mews that were completely drowned out by the roar of traffic. I felt a surge of panic unlike anything I'd ever experienced. In all my years of construction work, I'd seen accidents, injuries, and close calls. I'd learned to stay calm under pressure, to think clearly in dangerous situations. But watching this helpless, innocent creature facing certain death just yards away from me triggered something primal and overwhelming. My first instinct was to run into traffic and grab the kitten, but years of safety training immediately kicked in. Running into active highway traffic would be suicide, and it wouldn't help the kitten if I got myself killed in the process, but standing there doing nothing felt just as impossible. I looked around frantically for help. My crew was spread out along the median, each focused on their own dangerous work. Tony was 100 yards away, coordinating with the state inspector. The flag workers were positioned at the construction zone boundaries, too far away to be of immediate help. I could try to radio for assistance, but by the time anyone responded and figured out how to safely stop traffic, it would be too late. Every second that passed brought another wave of vehicles racing toward the kitten at speeds that would turn any collision into instant death. The kitten stumbled again, this time falling onto its side. It struggled to get back up, its tiny legs shaking with exhaustion and fear. A pickup truck roared past, and I could see the driver's face through the windshield, completely unaware that he'd just missed ending a life by mere inches. I realized with growing horror that most drivers probably couldn't even see the kitten. At highway speeds, something so small would be nearly invisible until it was too late. And even if they did spot it, there would be no time to react safely. Swerving or braking suddenly at 70 miles per hour on a busy interstate could cause a multi-car accident that would kill multiple people. The mathematical reality of the situation was starkly clear. The kitten had minutes, maybe less, before its luck ran out. But stopping 6 lanes of highway traffic to save one tiny animal seemed equally impossible. I felt trapped between the urgency of the situation and the limitations of what I could realistically do. As I stood there paralyzed by indecision, another memory surfaced. I was 8 years old, walking home from school with my sister Sarah, who was only 5 at the time. We'd found a baby bird that had fallen from its nest, lying helpless on the sidewalk. Sarah had begged me to help it, her little eyes filled with tears. I'd told her there was nothing we could do, that nature had to take its course. We'd walked away, and Sarah had cried the whole way home. Later that evening, she'd convinced our father to go back with her, but by then it was too late. The bird was gone. Sarah had looked at me with such disappointment that night. Not anger, just sad disappointment that her big brother, who she thought could do anything, had chosen not to help when it mattered most. That look had haunted me for years, and now, 26 years later, I was facing the same choice again. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't a helpless 8-year-old boy. I was a grown man with skills, experience, and the ability to make a difference. The question was whether I had the courage to try. I thought about all the safety meetings I'd attended, all the rules and procedures drilled into us about never compromising safety protocols. I thought about my responsibility to my crew, to my mother who depended on my income, to my sister and her new baby who looked up to me as an example. But I also thought about that tiny, helpless creature facing certain death just yards away from me. I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be, what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. Was I someone who followed rules and stayed safe, or was I someone who took action when innocent life was at stake? As another truck rumbled past, missing the kitten by inches, something crystallized in my mind. I couldn't stop 6 lanes of traffic, but I might be able to create a brief window of opportunity. The highway patrol would occasionally create rolling roadblocks for maintenance operations, using police cars to gradually slow traffic while work was completed. I didn't have police cars, but I did have something almost as good. I had a construction crew with vehicles, radios, and the authority to control traffic for safety purposes. It would be dangerous, potentially career-ending if something went wrong, but it might be the kitten's only chance. I grabbed my radio and called Tony. Tony, this is Marcus. I need you to listen carefully. We have a life-threatening emergency in the northbound lanes. Tony's voice crackled back immediately. What kind of emergency? Are you hurt? No, but there's a blind kitten in the center lane. It's going to be killed any second if we don't act. There was a long pause. Marcus, did you just say a kitten? Tony, I know how it sounds, but you have to trust me. This animal is going to die, and there might be something we can do to prevent it. I need you to coordinate a rolling slowdown with our flag trucks. Another pause, longer this time. I could imagine Tony weighing the risks, thinking about liability, regulations, and the potential consequences of disrupting a major interstate highway to save a cat. Marcus, you know I can't authorize stopping traffic for an animal. The liability alone would... Tony, please, just look for yourself. Northeast corner of the median, center lane northbound. Just look. I waited, my heart pounding, watching the kitten struggle to stay upright as another wave of vehicles approached. After what felt like forever, Tony's voice came back on the radio. and I could hear the shock in it. Oh my God, how did that thing get out there? I don't know, but it's blind, Tony. It can't see the cars coming. We're the only ones who can help. What happened next will stay with me for the rest of my life. Tony made a decision that went against every rule in the book, every safety protocol we'd ever been taught. He decided that sometimes doing the right thing mattered more than following the rules. Marcus, I'm calling a code yellow emergency slowdown. Tell me exactly where you want to enter the traffic pattern. Code yellow was our signal for a temporary traffic disruption due to safety concerns. It gave us the authority to use our flag vehicles to gradually slow traffic while we dealt with an emergency. Technically, it was supposed to be used for human emergencies, but Tony was willing to stretch the definition. I watched as our flag trucks moved into position at strategic points up and down the highway. The plan was to create a rolling slowdown that would gradually reduce traffic speed without causing the kind of sudden stops that could trigger accidents. It would only give me a few minutes, but it might be enough. As the slowdown began to take effect, I could see the gaps between vehicles starting to increase. Traffic was still moving, but at 40 miles per hour instead of 70. It was still dangerous, but it was survivable if I moved fast and smart. I climbed over the concrete barrier, separating the median from the northbound lanes. My legs felt shaky, and my mouth was dry as sand. I'd done dangerous things before in my construction career, but I'd never deliberately put myself in harm's way like this. The first step onto the highway surface was terrifying. Even with the traffic slowdown, cars were still racing past, just feet away. The sound was overwhelming. Engines, tires on asphalt, and the Doppler effect of vehicles approaching and receding at high speed. I looked ahead and spotted the kitten, still alive but clearly exhausted. It had made its way closer to the center line, which was actually more dangerous because it put the tiny creature directly in the path of both directions of traffic. Taking a deep breath, I began moving toward the kitten, timing my steps with the gaps between vehicles. Each step felt like an eternity. My safety training kept screaming at me to get out of the roadway, but I forced myself to focus on the tiny life that depended on me. As I got closer, I could see the kitten more clearly, and it broke my heart. It was obviously very young, probably only 3 or 4 weeks old. Its white fur was matted and dirty, and its clouded eyes were infected and crusted over. It was so thin I could see its ribs, and it moved with the weakness of an animal that hadn't eaten in days. But what struck me most was its courage. Despite being blind, despite being terrified and exhausted, this little creature kept trying. It kept moving, kept calling out with its tiny voice, kept fighting to survive even when everything was stacked against it. A car approached faster than I'd expected, and I had to freeze in place as it roared past, the driver laying on the horn. The blast of air from its passage knocked me off balance, and I realized just how precarious my situation was. One wrong step, one moment of bad timing, and I'd be joining the statistics of highway fatalities. But I was close now, just a few yards from the kitten. I could hear its pitiful mewing, even over the traffic noise. It seemed to sense my presence somehow and began moving toward me, though it couldn't see me coming. That's when everything went wrong. A massive semi-truck that hadn't gotten the slowdown message came barreling down the highway at full speed. The driver was probably running behind schedule and pushing hard to make up time. He was in the far right lane, but his truck was so wide and moving so fast that the displacement of air would be enormous. I realized with horror that the kitten was directly in the path of the truck's air blast. At that size and weight, the kitten would be thrown like a leaf in a hurricane. Even if the truck didn't hit it directly, the turbulence could easily throw the tiny creature under the wheels of following vehicles. I had seconds to act. The truck was maybe 50 yards away and closing fast. There was no time to calculate, no time to think about safety protocols or personal risk. There was only time to move. I lunged forward, diving toward the kitten with everything I had. The asphalt scraped against my arms and chest as I slid across the highway surface, my hands reaching desperately for the tiny white form ahead of me. The world seemed to slow down. I could see the kitten turning toward me, probably hearing my movement. I could see the massive grill of the approaching truck filling my peripheral vision. I could feel the heat of the asphalt burning through my clothes. My fingers closed around the kitten just as the truck thundered past. The blast of air hit us like a physical wall, lifting me off the ground and sending us both tumbling across the highway surface. I clutched the tiny creature to my chest, trying to protect it with my body as we rolled. We came to rest against the concrete median barrier. For a moment, everything was quiet except for the ringing in my ears. Then I became aware of voices shouting, radios crackling, and the sound of vehicles stopping. I looked down at my hands, terrified of what I might find. But there, nestled against my chest, was the kitten, alive, breathing, its tiny heart beating so fast it felt like a hummingbird's wings against my palm. Tony was the first to reach me, his face pale with shock and relief. "Marcus, are you okay? Don't move until the paramedics check you out." I sat up slowly, still cradling the kitten. My arms were scraped and bleeding, my clothes were torn, and I had what felt like severe road rash on my left shoulder. But I was alive, and more importantly, so was the tiny life I'd risked everything to save. "I'm fine," I managed to say, though my voice was shaking. "But this little one needs help. It's blind and hasn't eaten in days." By now, a crowd had gathered. Several of my crew members, a state trooper who had responded to the traffic disruption, and even some drivers who had stopped to see what was happening. Word was spreading quickly about what had just occurred. The state trooper, a middle-aged man named Officer Rodriguez, knelt down beside me. "Son, that was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen on this highway. Probably both." I looked down at the kitten again. It had stopped struggling and seemed to be calming down in the warmth of my hands. Despite everything it had been through, it began to purr, a sound so soft I could barely hear it over the traffic, but unmistakable nonetheless. "What are you going to do with it?" Officer Rodriguez asked. It was a good question, and one I hadn't really thought about in the heat of the moment. I couldn't just leave it here, obviously, but I'd never owned a pet before, and this kitten clearly needed specialized medical care. "I guess I'm going to take it to a veterinarian," I said. "After that, I honestly don't know." The paramedics checked me over and decided I didn't need to go to the hospital, though they strongly recommended I see my doctor about the road rash. More importantly, they helped me fashion a makeshift carrier for the kitten using a small cardboard box and some soft cloth from the first aid kit. As I carefully placed the tiny creature in its temporary bed, something remarkable happened. Despite being blind, despite all the trauma it had endured, the kitten seemed to recognize that it was finally safe. It curled up in the soft cloth and fell asleep almost immediately, its tiny body finally able to relax for the first time in who knows how long. Tony pulled me aside as the crew began returning to work. "Marcus, you know I'm going to have to write this up. What you did was incredibly dangerous, and it violated about 15 different safety protocols." I nodded, understanding. "I know, Tony. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from this." He looked at me for a long moment, then at the box containing the sleeping kitten. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. I just hope the higher-ups see it the same way." As I drove to the nearest veterinary clinic, I found myself thinking about what had just happened. In the span of 30 minutes, my entire perspective on life had shifted. I'd always thought of myself as a practical, rule-following guy who didn't take unnecessary risks. But when faced with a choice between safety and compassion, I discovered something about myself I never knew existed. The veterinary clinic was a small practice in a strip mall about 10 minutes from the construction site. As I walked in carrying the box, The receptionist's eyes widened with concern. "Oh my goodness, what happened?" she asked. "Highway rescue," I said simply. "This kitten was lost in traffic. It's blind and probably hasn't eaten in days." Dr. Sarah Martinez was the veterinarian on duty that day, and she would later tell me that she'd been practicing for 12 years but had never seen a case quite like this. She carefully examined the kitten while I explained how I'd found it. "The blindness appears to be caused by a severe infection that could have been treated if caught early," she told me. "But at this stage, the damage is probably permanent. However, that doesn't mean this little one can't live a full, happy life." She explained that the kitten was definitely a female, probably about 4 weeks old, and severely malnourished. With proper care, medication, and feeding, she could make a full recovery from everything except the blindness. "The question is, doctor," Martinez said, "what are your plans for her?" I stared down at the tiny kitten, now clean and resting comfortably on a soft blanket. She was even smaller than I'd thought, probably weighing less than a pound. But despite her size and disability, there was something incredibly resilient about her. She'd survived being lost and alone in one of the most dangerous environments imaginable, and she was still fighting. "I don't know anything about taking care of a cat," I admitted to Dr. Martinez. "I've never had a pet before. I work long hours in a dangerous job, and I'm not sure I can provide what she needs." Dr. Martinez nodded understandingly. "Caring for a blind kitten does require special considerations. She'll need a safe, consistent environment where she can learn to navigate by sound and scent. She'll also need regular medical checkups and medication for her eyes." As she spoke, the kitten stirred and began making soft, mewing sounds. Without thinking, I reached out and gently stroked her head with one finger. She immediately began purring and turned toward my touch. "She knows your voice," Dr. Martinez observed. "You're the first positive contact she's had with a human being, possibly in her entire life. To her, you're not just a rescuer, you're her whole world." The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming. This tiny creature had already bonded with me, trusted me completely based on the few minutes of safety I'd provided. Could I really abandon her now? I thought about my empty apartment, my solitary lifestyle, my predictable routine. Then I thought about what my sister Sarah had said just a few weeks earlier when I'd visited her and baby Jake. She'd commented that I seemed lonely, that maybe I needed something to care for besides just work and responsibilities. What would I need to do? I heard myself asking. If I decided to keep her, what would that involve? Dr. Martinez smiled. "Well, first, we'd need to give her a name." I looked down at the kitten, so small and white against the dark blanket. Despite everything she'd been through, despite her disability, she seemed to have an inner light that shone through. It reminded me of hope persisting in darkness. "Hope," I said suddenly. "Her name is Hope." Over the next several weeks, Hope and I began a journey together that neither of us could have anticipated. Dr. Martinez had been right about the special care required for a blind kitten, but she'd understated how rewarding it would be. Taking care of Hope required me to completely restructure my life. I had to kitten-proof my apartment, creating safe pathways and eliminating hazards. I learned to think about my environment from the perspective of a creature who navigated by sound, scent, and touch rather than sight. The first few nights were challenging. Hope cried for her mother and seemed disoriented in the unfamiliar space. I found myself sleeping on the floor next to her bed, talking to her softly whenever she seemed frightened. My voice became her anchor, the familiar sound that told her she was safe. Feeding was complicated at first. Hope had to learn to eat solid food, and being blind made the process messy and frustrating for both of us. But gradually, she began to understand the routine. The sound of the can opener meant food was coming. The gentle tap of my finger on her bowl helped her locate it. My encouraging voice told her she was doing well. As Hope grew stronger, her personality began to emerge. Despite her disability, she was curious, playful, and remarkably fearless. She learned to navigate my apartment with impressive skill, memorizing the location of furniture, her food and water bowls, and her favorite sleeping spots. Word of the highway rescue had spread throughout our construction crew and beyond. Tony had indeed filed a report about the incident, but rather than leading to disciplinary action, it had caught the attention of the company's regional manager, who decided it was exactly the kind of positive publicity the company needed. Local news stations picked up the story, and suddenly I found myself being interviewed about the rescue. The reporter, a young woman named Jennifer Walsh, was particularly interested in Hope's recovery and adaptation to her new life. "What made you risk your life for a small animal?" she asked during the interview. I thought about the question seriously before answering. I think it was because she reminded me that every life has value, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Sometimes we get so caught up in the big picture that we forget about the individual struggles happening right in front of us. The story aired on a Friday evening, and by Monday morning, my phone was ringing constantly. People from all over the state were calling to ask about Hope, to share their own rescue stories, and to offer support. A local pet supply store offered to donate food and supplies. A veterinary college asked if they could study Hope's adaptation techniques to help other blind animals. Most surprisingly, the State Department of Transportation contacted our company to commend the crew's quick thinking and professional handling of an unusual emergency situation. Rather than facing discipline, I found myself being praised for demonstrating exactly the kind of quick decision making and compassion they wanted to see in their contractors. As Hope grew from a tiny kitten into a young cat, she began to have an impact far beyond what I could have imagined. Dr. Martinez asked if I would be willing to bring Hope to the clinic occasionally to help socialize other animals, particularly those with disabilities or trauma histories. Hope seemed to have an intuitive understanding of other animals' needs. She would curl up next to frightened dogs in the waiting room, purr softly for cats recovering from surgery, and somehow manage to provide comfort just by being present. Her blindness, which could have been seen as a limitation, actually made her more approachable to anxious animals. Children were particularly drawn to Hope. Dr. Martinez began inviting local schools to visit the clinic for educational programs about animal care and compassion. Hope became the star of these sessions, demonstrating that disability didn't mean inability and that every creature deserved love and respect. One visit particularly stands out in my memory. A little girl named Emma, who was herself blind from birth, met Hope during one of these educational sessions. Watching Emma's face light up as she realized that Hope navigated the world much the same way she did was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever witnessed. "She's just like me," Emma exclaimed, and the joy in her voice brought tears to my eyes. Emma's mother later told me that meeting Hope had given her daughter a new sense of confidence and belonging. If a tiny cat could thrive despite being blind, then Emma could too. The story of Hope's rescue continued to spread, inspiring others to take action in their own communities. A construction worker in Georgia stopped traffic to rescue a family of ducks crossing a busy road. A teacher in California started a program where students cared for rescued animals as part of their science curriculum. A firefighter in New York began specializing in animal rescue techniques. Each story that reached me reinforced something I was beginning to understand. Small acts of compassion have the power to create waves of positive change that extend far beyond their original scope. Hope's rescue hadn't just saved one small life, it had inspired countless people to look at the world differently, to value life more deeply, and to act on their compassion rather than just feeling it. My own life had been transformed as well. The solitary existence I'd lived for years had been replaced by purpose and connection. Taking care of Hope had taught me patience, empathy, and the joy that comes from putting another's needs before your own. My apartment, once a sterile place where I simply slept and ate, had become a home filled with the sounds of contentment and play. My family had noticed the change too. My mother commented that I seemed happier, more relaxed, more engaged with the world around me. Sarah brought baby Jake to visit Hope regularly, and watching my nephew gently pet the cat while she purred in his lap created memories I knew I'd treasure forever. About 6 months after the rescue, Dr. Martinez called with interesting news. A family in the next county had been searching for their missing cat, a pregnant white female who had escaped from their home just before giving birth. They'd been posting flyers and checking shelters for weeks before someone told them about Hope's story. When they came to meet Hope, there was immediate recognition. She responded to their voices with unusual excitement, and they confirmed that she was indeed their missing cat, Luna. But the story was more complex than a simple lost pet case. The family, the Johnsons, explained that Luna had given birth to a litter of 4 kittens shortly after escaping. They'd found 3 of the babies in their yard, but one had been missing. That missing kitten had apparently been Hope. "We searched everywhere," Mrs. Johnson explained through tears. "We never imagined she could have made it all the way to the highway. She must have traveled miles." The family faced a difficult decision. They wanted Luna back, but they recognized the bond that had formed between Hope and me. More importantly, they understood that Hope's special needs were being met in ways they might not be able to provide. After much discussion, we reached an arrangement that felt right for everyone. Luna would return to her family where she belonged, but Hope would stay with me. However, we would maintain contact, allowing Hope to occasionally visit her mother and siblings. It was an unconventional solution, but it honored the bonds that had formed while ensuring everyone's needs were met. The experience with the Johnson family made me realize how many animals go missing every year, how many families search desperately for beloved pets, and how few resources exist to help reunite them. It sparked an idea that would become my next major project. Working with Dr. Martinez and several other local veterinarians, we established a volunteer network focused on animal rescue and reunification. We created a database of missing pets, coordinated with local shelters and rescue groups, and trained volunteers in safe rescue techniques. The network grew quickly, drawing support from construction workers, emergency responders, veterinary professionals, and ordinary citizens who wanted to make a difference. We developed protocols for highway rescues, created educational materials about animal safety, and established emergency response teams for natural disasters. Hope became our unofficial mascot, accompanying me to training sessions and community events. Her story served as inspiration for volunteers and reminder of why the work mattered. She demonstrated that every life had value and that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they chose to act with compassion. As I reflect on the events that began with one small kitten lost on a highway, I'm amazed by the interconnected nature of compassion. That split-second decision to risk my safety for Hope's life created ripples that continue to spread, touching lives I'll never know about and inspiring actions I'll never witness. Hope is now 3 years old, a confident and loving cat who has adapted so completely to her blindness that visitors often don't realize she can't see. She knows every inch of our home, can locate her favorite toys by sound, and greets me at the door every evening with the enthusiasm of someone who has never forgotten that I once saved her life. But the truth is, Hope saved my life too. She transformed me from someone who merely existed into someone who truly lived. She taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite fear when something important is at stake. She showed me that caring for another being brings a depth of purpose and joy that nothing else can match. I still work construction, still build bridges and roads and structures that will serve the community for decades to come. But my perspective on the work has changed completely. I see each project not just as a job to be completed, but as an opportunity to create something that makes life better for others. My crew knows about my involvement with animal rescue, and several of them have become volunteers themselves. We've incorporated animal safety awareness into our standard procedures, and we've successfully rescued dozens of animals from construction sites and roadways over the past 3 years. The company has embraced our rescue work as part of their community engagement initiative. They've provided funding for equipment, training, and emergency response capabilities. What began as a violation of safety protocols has become a celebrated part of our corporate culture. Tony, who took the risk of supporting my rescue attempt that day, has become one of our most dedicated volunteers. He often jokes that authorizing that traffic slowdown was the best decision he ever made as a supervisor, not because it saved Hope's life, but because it revealed the kind of people we could choose to be. People often ask me what I learned from the experience of rescuing and raising Hope. The lessons have been profound and far reaching, touching every aspect of my life. I learned that compassion is not a weakness, but a strength that enables us to see clearly what truly matters. When I saw Hope in danger, all the complications and excuses that normally guide decision making fell away, leaving only the simple truth that a life needed saving. I learned that taking care of another being teaches you to take better care of yourself. Hope's needs forced me to become more organized, more patient, and more attuned to the small details that make life comfortable and secure. I learned that disability doesn't mean inability. Hope navigates her world with skill and confidence that would impress anyone. She's taught me to focus on what I can do rather than worrying about what I can't. Most importantly, I learned that every small act of kindness has the potential to create change far beyond what we can imagine. When I made the decision to save Hope, I thought I was simply preserving one small life. I had no idea I was starting a chain reaction that would touch hundreds of lives and create lasting change in my community. Hope's story continues to evolve and inspire. Last month, a documentary filmmaker contacted us about creating a film focused on animal rescue and the ordinary people who risk everything to help creatures in need. Hope will be featured prominently, not as a victim who was saved, but as a teacher who transformed everyone she touched. The rescue network we established has grown to include 12 counties and has successfully reunited over 500 animals with their families. We've prevented countless tragedies and created connections between people who share the common value of compassion for all living things. My personal life has been enriched beyond measure. I'm in a relationship now with Dr. Martinez, who shares my passion for animal welfare and who fell in love with Hope almost as quickly as she fell in love with me. We're planning to move in together soon, creating a home where we can foster animals in need and continue our rescue work. Sarah's son, Jake, is now old enough to understand Hope's story, and he often asks to hear it again and again. He's learning that being brave doesn't mean being unafraid. It means doing the right thing even when you are afraid. It's a lesson I hope will serve him well throughout his life. Just last week, I received a letter from a teacher in Oregon whose class had learned about Hope's story through the documentary trailer. The students had started their own animal rescue club and had already helped save 3 local animals in distress. Their teacher wrote that the children were inspired by the idea that ordinary people could be heroes simply by choosing to care. These stories remind me that Hope's impact extends far beyond what I can see or measure. Somewhere, right now, someone is making a difficult decision about whether to help an animal in need. Perhaps they'll remember Hope's story and choose compassion over convenience, action over apathy. The construction site where I first saw Hope has been completed now. It's a beautiful stretch of highway that serves thousands of commuters every day. But for me, it will always be the place where I learned that the most important construction project isn't made of concrete and steel. It's the building of character, compassion, and community that happens when we choose to care for those who cannot care for themselves. As I write this, Hope is curled up on my lap, purring softly as she sleeps. Her presence is a constant reminder of how much life can change in a single moment, how much good can come from one act of courage, and how much love can grow from the simple decision to open your heart. When people hear Hope's story, they often say they could never do what I did, risk their life for an animal. But I believe they're wrong. I think most people, when faced with suffering they have the power to prevent, will find courage they didn't know they possessed. The challenge isn't finding the courage, it's recognizing the moments when courage is called for. Hope taught me that these moments come more often than we think. They don't always involve dramatic highway rescues or life threatening situations. Sometimes they're as simple as stopping to help someone who's lost, volunteering at a local shelter, or choosing to see the value in a life that others might overlook. The blind kitten who was lost in highway traffic became a teacher, a healer, and an inspiration to thousands of people. She proved that significance isn't measured by size or ability, but by the capacity to touch hearts and change lives. Every morning when I wake up and see Hope stretching and beginning her day with confidence and joy, I'm reminded that miracles aren't rare divine interventions. They're the natural result of love meeting need, of compassion overcoming fear, of ordinary people choosing to do extraordinary things. That morning on Interstate 95, I thought I was saving Hope's life, but looking back now, I understand that she saved mine too. She gave me purpose, taught me love, and showed me that the most meaningful construction projects are built not with tools and materials, but with open hearts and willing hands. And the best part? Hope's story isn't finished yet. Every day brings new opportunities to spread compassion, to help those in need, and to build a world where every life is valued and protected. That's the true legacy of one small, blind kitten who refused to give up, and of a construction worker who chose to care. In the end, that's what Hope taught me, that caring isn't just something we feel, it's something we do. And when we do it with courage and commitment, we don't just change individual lives, we help build a better world for everyone. The highway is completed now, and traffic flows smoothly where once there was danger and construction. But somewhere out there, another animal needs help. Another person faces the choice between safety and compassion. Another opportunity exists to prove that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when love calls them to action. Hope is ready for whatever comes next, and thanks to her, so am I.